I have been a moonshiner ever since that I've been born. I've drunk up all of my money and stealed up all of my corn. I'll go up some dark hollow and put up my moonshine still. See, I'll make you 1 gallon for a $5 bill. I'll go up some dark hollow and get you some booze. See if the revenues don't get me no money, will I lose? Come on, all you moonshiners, and stand all in a row.
Hey there, this is Missy with Appalachian Haunts and Haints, and we are here. Well, no introductions necessary. I'll let him take it over.
My name is Zach Bales, and I call myself the Paranormal Roadtripper. And for the better part of the last 2 decades, I've spent a lot of time traveling all over the United States and all over the world, for that matter, sort of seeking out what I call the unusual, the unexplained, and the otherworldly, and trying to collect various oddities, curiosities. And here in the past, well, it's been a little over a year ago, actually, about 12 months to the day, actually, we finally, me and my wife Melissa, have created what we call Paranormal Roadtripper's Nightmare Gallery. It's a collection of all the different things that we've picked up over the years. I'm an English teacher, and I've always been interested in folklore and storytelling. And so opening this gallery, the Nightmare Gallery, here in Somerset, Kentucky, was a chance for me to tell stories, tell stories about some of the folklore, some of the things that go bump in the night all over the state of Kentucky, but elsewhere as well. So that's what the Nightmare Gallery is. Here in this place, you will find information about Kentucky's ghosts and paranormal history, as well as some of the cryptids. If you're familiar with cryptids, I'm sure you are. Creatures that are believed to exist but aren't scientifically proven to exist just yet. We also have a ton of UFO stories here in the state of Kentucky. We have lots of information about those harrowing cases. I would argue that Kentucky arguably has maybe more UFO history than just about any other state in the United States, which I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a few minutes. But we also, here at the Nightmare Gallery, no Nightmare Gallery would be complete without information about some of the thrills and chills from the silver screen, some of the iconic horror movie villains that I'm sure your viewers are familiar with. There's a number of these masked characters here around the gallery. So I guess we can walk around and talk about some of this stuff. I like to talk about this fellow right over here, usually first. Of course, many, I'm sure, horror movie fans will recognize that as Michael Myers. Not as many horror movie fans probably are aware that Michael Myers has some very specific connections to the state of Kentucky. For starters, John Carpenter, the director of the original Halloween film, he was actually born not too far from where we're standing right now, just down the road actually, in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Matter of fact, John Carpenter throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he used a lot of Kentucky locations for his films. If you watch the original Halloween, you know that Michael Myers was locked up in Smith's Grove Sanitarium for most of his life. Well, Smith's Grove just so happens to be a little town just down the road from here. Many of the Warren County is where Haddonfield is in the original Halloween. Well, Warren County is also where Bowling Green is, which that's where John Carpenter was from. I'm telling you, there's all sorts of connections. If you are ever in the Bowling Green area or just down the road from here, you can go on quite a tour of many of the hot spots from John Carpenter's films. So we always like to talk about Michael Myers, as well as Jason Voorhees. We have a number of screen-used props and prop replicas. We actually have many screen-used props in our museum from Friday the 13th series, The X-Files, among others. But like I said, I'm a big horror movie buff. This map up here, actually, I'm particularly proud of this. I kind of put this together myself recently. I call it the United States of Horror. There is a misconception sometimes that a movie is filmed and set in the same place, and that is not true. You know, sometimes a movie is filmed in Tennessee, but it's supposed to take place in Georgia. This map up here shows us where some of the famous horror movies were set. So Kentucky's claim to fame, as far as horror movie history goes, as you can see, is the Return of the Living Dead. This is the zombie film from the 1980s, the one that started the whole brains sort of craze. Took place up in Louisville. But if you're a fan of horror movies, I'm sure you probably recognize a lot of these. What's your favorite? What's your favorite horror movie? I wonder.
Halloween.
Halloween, Haddonfield, Illinois. There you go.
Jeepers Creepers.
Jeepers Creepers down in Florida.
That the other day.
Oh yes, that's a great one as well. I always tell people if they're interested in visiting the location of one of these movies, not only filmed but also set. Actually, the closest one to where we are right now here in Somerset is actually not the Return of the Living Dead up in Louisville. It's actually the Evil Dead down in Morristown, Tennessee. The little cabin where they filmed that film back in the 1980s. The cabin is not there, unfortunately, anymore. But the foundations of the cabin are. So if you're ever in the East Tennessee, which I know you all are very intimately familiar with, yeah, you can stop by and take a look at the foundations of the original Evil Dead cabin. So we can continue around the room over here. We also have a rather extensive section of the gallery here devoted to the history and mystery, for that matter, of the paranormal, ghost hunting. Not just here in Kentucky, but all over the United States. We get a lot of guests here in the gallery who, I'm often hearing this. I'm hearing people say, I think ghost hunting is a relatively new phenomenon. Something that's come around just in the last few years because of shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures. But to those people who say this, I often tell them, that's really not the case. Ghost hunting has been popular for many, many years, much longer than those television shows. In fact, the history of ghost hunting really goes back even further than the Victorian era, late 1800s. That was probably when ghost hunting was its most popular. This is the era where men and women would come into Victorian parlors. They would often sit around tables that kind of look like this right here. They would hold hands, dim the lights, and sort of try to conjure voices from beyond. This is the era of I'm sure you've heard of seances before. This is the era of the seance. Some of what you see on this table are the tools of the trade that were used in the Victorian era. The spirit trumpet, for example. Ouija boards were pretty popular back then. They still are to this day. Spirit slates, crystal balls, tarot cards, reading tea leaves from cups. It looked very similar to this right here. These are some of the olden days toys, tools, I should say, but toys works as well. They were used to investigate for the paranormal. But I tell you what, times have changed. Today, well over 100 years later, the technology that's used for ghost hunting it's grown in leaps and bounds. Down here at the bottom of this case right here are a number of the modern day ghost hunting gadgets. If you've done any ghost hunting yourself, you're probably intimately familiar with many of these. Of course, the digital audio recorder down there in the bottom right corner, those are used to record EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. The theory goes that if you take a digital audio recorder into a haunted house, you ask a series of questions. Sometimes when you're playing back the tape, there might be an additional voice on that recorder, one that you didn't hear at the time of your recording. We call that an EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Up here in the top left corner, some EMF detectors. The theory also goes that ghosts can manipulate electromagnetic fields. Those devices allow us to sort of detect those changes. One of my personal favorites, though, is the brass rods down there in the bottom left corner of the case. Of course, those are known as dowsing rods. A lot of people have their doubts about the efficacy of dowsing rods, but I tell you what, the history of dowsing goes back a lot further than ghost hunting. It goes back like 1,000 years, in fact. Dowsing was originally used not to find ghosts, it was used to find groundwater, water witching. So, I mean, this goes back, as I said, 1,000 years, and there's a lot of people who swear that the best way to find water, where you need to dig a well, that sort of thing, is by using dowsing rods. Now, the items in these two cases on either side of the space right here, I'll talk about those next. As I said earlier, I call myself the Paranormal Roadtripper. I call myself that because, well, we do a lot of traveling, my wife and I. In the past, 10 years, we visited 49 of the 50 states and 25 countries, sort of investigating the unknown. Over that time, we've met a whole lot of people. A lot of people from all over the country and world who are interested in this phenomenon just as much as we are. And I tell you, of all those people, there's been a certain number of them who have come out of the woodwork and said things like, Zach, I've got something in my house, an object that I'm not really sure I want in my house anymore. I think that this item might be haunted. Would you care to take it off our hands? Well, over the years, I've never turned anybody down yet. So the items you see in these two cases are just a few of the items that have been given to me over the years that are believed to be haunted. For example, I'll start with these two dolls right here. My wife works at the local hospital here in Somerset. About 5 years ago, she had a coworker who, and this is very important, did not believe in ghosts. Well, this coworker inherited these two porcelain dolls from her grandmother when her grandmother passed away. At first, this lady was excited to receive these two dolls. You know, they were a nice memento of her grandmother's life. Porcelain dolls, antique. She had no qualms at all about bringing these two dolls into her house. Again, she didn't believe in ghosts. Almost immediately, though, this woman's two young sons started complaining to their mother. They were saying things like, Mom, the dolls, Grandma's dolls, were moving around last night. We saw them with their own eyes. We heard them moving around, and we're really scared. Well, again, this woman didn't believe in ghosts. So she automatically assumed that these two sons of hers were telling stories to their mother. They were lying to their mother. Either that, or they were letting their imaginations get the best of them. So she basically told them, she said, you know what happens to little boys who lie to their mothers, or their mother, they get a whipping, they get a spanking. And she thought that would settle it, that she would never hear about the dolls moving again, but that didn't happen. Just a couple mornings later, same thing. Mom, Grandma's dolls were doing it again last night. This went on for days. Days turned to weeks. It wasn't until about 4 or 5 weeks later that the youngest son came to his mom and said, Mom, the dolls aren't just moving now. Now they're hurting us. And the mother was like, hurting you? The boy pulled up his sleeve. They were deep scratch marks up and down his arms that matched just perfectly with the porcelain fingers on that boy doll. Suddenly, this woman started believing in ghosts. She threw those two dolls into a black plastic garbage bag and took them to work where my wife worked, and she knew we were interested in this sort of stuff, and we've had them on display here ever since. Ever since we opened last August, we've had them on display. And in that time, we've had well over 1,000 visitors in here. And I kid you not, out of those 1,000 visitors, we've had somewhere between 30 and 40 probably who have claimed to see these dolls move with their own two eyes. It's typically their eyes, their hands, their shoulders, sometimes their fingers that will be seen moving. About a month ago, I had a group down here from Ohio. It was a man, a woman, and their young son. Well, as I was telling this story, I could tell that the young son was determined to see these dolls move. In fact, he came over here and he pressed his face to the glass. I continued with the tour, and the little boy stayed over here in the corner. Me and his parents sort of moved around the room. Well, as soon as we had gotten out of sight of the case here, we hear the boy start shouting. I come around the corner. First thing I see when I'm staring down this way, I see the little boy stumble away from the case. He bounces into this table. He's got both of his hands clutched over his mouth. His dad shouts, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" The little boy claims that as his face was pressed to the glass, the little boy doll here, his right eye, and only his right eye, had darted over, stared at the little boy right in the face, winked at him, and then darted right back. We get that about every 3 or so weeks, like clockwork around here at the gallery. There's a famous YouTuber called the Carpetbagger. I don't know if y'all ran into the Carpetbagger before, but he was in here a couple months ago, and he filmed the dolls and did the whole video, put a video online. I got on there, I was morbidly curious to see what people were saying on his video about the dolls. I kid you not, and you can check it out today. There were a number of comments on his video. Out of the 100 comments or so, there's probably, 10 or 12 that said, "Oh my gosh, the dolls moved. Go to timestamp 10 minutes, 15 seconds. Oh my gosh, I saw the dolls move. Go to timestamp 15 minutes, 48 seconds. So if you don't see the dolls move on camera here, maybe you could check that out as well. Or maybe you'll be lucky and you'll get a little bit of movement out of these dolls yourself today.
Move. Do it now.
I call this section of Kentucky that we're in right now, I call it the Bluegrass Triangle. Kind of like the Bermuda Triangle, because in all the traveling that I've done across the United States, I feel like this is one of the most paranormally active areas, perhaps in the country. A lot of people ask me, what is it about this area that's so unusual? Well, for starters, there's multiple Civil War battles fought within this triangle. Some very bloody, consequential battles of the Civil War, one of which was fought about 8 miles from where we're standing right now. On top of that, there's a lot of Native American history, some very dark Native American history and legends that also come out of this area as well. Beneath the ground here in Kentucky is limestone. And if you believe in crystals and energy, limestone is believed to sort of be a superconductor of sorts, just unusual stuff. These 15 things over here on this list are just a few of the iconic stories, legends, things that have been seen, heard, felt within the Bluegrass Triangle. Not only do we have one of the most famous, if not the most famous, I wouldn't say the most famous, that's probably the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, but certainly a close second. Famous UFO abduction of all time took place about 25 miles north of where we're at right now. We also have all sorts of ghost stories and haunted hot spots and curses. And we also, a lot of people roll their eyes. A lot of people roll their eyes at me when I say this next thing, but we also have our fair share of monsters, of those cryptids that I was talking about earlier. Here in the Pulaski County and neighboring county area alone, we have no fewer than 5 of these sort of iconic creatures that go bump in the night that are said to roam this area. And then the further you get out into the Bluegrass Triangle, the creatures become a little more, perhaps more well-known, famous, but also perhaps a little more deadly as well. I do always like to mention the Pope Lick Monster. They say the Pope Lick Monster is the only cryptid with a body count. And of course they say that because all the time it seems like people lose their lives sort of investigating this cryptid. They aren't killed by the Goat Man per se. They're killed by the active railway that the Goat Man is supposed to lurk at. Even those big signs up there in Pope Lick Park, the parklands of Louisville, there's big signs that say don't be on the railway. It's an active railway all the time. People will get out on the tracks. They'll lose their lives, unfortunately. I think of the Pope Lick Monster as sort of a siren of sorts. If you're familiar with the legend of the sirens, going all the way back to the Odyssey and Odysseus, sort of luring people into their domain. That's sort of what the Pope Lick Monster does. He lures people up onto his tracks where they, unfortunately, where all too often they lose their lives. But some of the other famous cryptids, I'm sure you all have done some investigating of many of these monsters. Of course, the iconic Hopkinsville Goblin, that's always a fun case to look into. The Bell Witch down in Adams, Tennessee, that's one of the though it's not inside the Bluegrass Triangle, I would call that the outskirts, I guess. That's certainly one of the scariest cases in American history of a haunting. Really the only time in American history where a man lost his life, and on his death certificate it even says killed by a ghost, killed by the Bell Witch. So kind of a fascinating story. And of course, out in western Kentucky, there's the land between the lakes. One of the most famous dogman encounters or dogman stories. I feel like the dogman phenomenon is only getting more and more popular with each passing year, and this is one of the great dogman territory stories, really, of all time. I think last summer there was a dogman conference, the very first dogman conference of all time. And it actually took place in the land between the lakes on the south end in Tennessee. Paris, Tennessee, I believe. That's where the first Dogman Conference was. So now, just like Bigfoot conferences are getting more and more popular, maybe we'll start seeing a preponderance of Dogman.
That'd be a cool thing to go to.
That would be,
Yeah, there is the second annual Dogman Conference this year is in Texas. So
Really?
I think it's going to be a roaming conference. It'll be make its way around. So.
Because they've seen them all over the country. So
They have indeed, yes. Michigan would be an interesting place to have the Dogman. I think that's kind of where some of the big sightings and famous videos and whatnot took place. Okay, we can, well, I'm sorry. I guess I can talk about the UFO sighting very briefly as well. I told you a few minutes ago, the UFO sighting here in Kentucky is arguably the most famous, one of the most famous of all time. These three ladies, in 1976, were claimed that they were taken up into a UFO. they claimed that there were some very unusual things done on them. Experiments were done on them while they were inside that UFO. One of the ladies claimed that she remembered her eyeballs being removed and laid down on her cheeks while these extraterrestrials had sent some sort of a metal rod back into her brain. It's a harrowing story. It took place that January night. They went to the newspapers here in our local newspaper here in Somerset and told the story. I kid you not, though, this story was quickly picked up all over the United States, all over Kentucky, and then all over the United States. But it kind of went down as one of the most famous UFO abduction cases of all time. Again, inside the Bluegrass Triangle, about 20 miles north of where we're standing right now. This final map shows you just a few of the areas here in the local Somerset area that are believed to be rife with paranormal activity. If you're interested in visiting one of these locations, I would be happy to give you directions to it. All you do is stop by the Nightmare Gallery here, and I will tell you what to expect and what you'll find when you get there. Actually, I got my start writing books. Before I was a paranormal road tripper, I was an author, and I wrote a couple books back in the early 2000s on ghost hunting. And the original book, called The Amateur's Guide to Ghost Hunting, it's sort of a series of anecdotes, things that happened to me all over Kentucky, really. The first book was all over Kentucky and Tennessee. And I wrote everything that happened to me in the book, turned it into a guide of sorts. But many of my initial paranormal stuff that I witnessed was at these locations. So these locations are very near and dear to me. So not only can I tell you the actual legends that are said to take place at these places, but I could actually also tell you what happened to me at these locations as well. Yeah, this display right here features, I know, some pretty nasty symbolism and whatnot, but this display is really not about these symbols. It's more about that symbol right up there. A lot of people, when they hear the term flying saucer, they're under the impression that it's science fiction. There's more fact, or there's more fiction there than fact. But believe it or not, the flying saucer phenomenon, there's a lot of science fact there as well. It's a fact that near the end of World War II, when the Germans were going down and they knew they were losing the war, that Hitler ordered the construction of a brand new flying machine, something that helped them better take on the United States Air Force. And what you see, some of the sketches here, these are reproductions that I've done myself from the originals. These are actually reproduced from the original sketches at the time. These are what the Germans were working on. It is fact that they were working on a UFO-type gunship to help them turn the tide of the war. Now, were they ever able to successfully get this program off the ground? It's debatable. However, according to legend, at the end of the war, after the United States, we win the war, according to legend, we took all the research and brought it back with us here to the States. Maybe got started on our own UFO-type flying saucer program, and maybe, just maybe, that was what crashed in Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947. Now, no discussion of Appalachian monsters, cryptids, you name it, would be complete without talking about this big fella right here. Kentucky is rife, I'm sure, as Tennessee is as well. Really, all of Appalachia is rife with stories of Bigfoot and these types of encounters. Here in Kentucky, I've experienced a couple things myself at a place called Green River. It's not too far from here. I actually wrote a book also about Bigfoot. It's called The Bigfooter's Atlas, and it details not only my encounter with what I think, or what I consider to be Bigfoot, but also I was determined to make it a little easier for future investigators to be able to find some of the Bigfoot hotspots all over the country. Some of them are notoriously hard to find. So this has been 3 years ago, I set out to not only tell my own encounter, but I also decided to try to make it a little easier for other investigators to find these hotspots by creating maps and guides. I turned it into an atlas called the Bigfooter's Atlas. It's something else we sell here at the museum. But every now and then, when an investigator will find unusual footprints in the woods, Bigfoot investigators, they will often bring plaster of Paris with them in water. They will mix those two items together and then pour that concoction into those unusual footprints. Now, once that hardens, they come away with what we call a foot cast. Now, over here in this corner of the room, we have some of the most famous Bigfoot foot casts that have ever been found. Of course, these are duplicates of the originals. I don't know if I'm sure you have seen the original Patterson-Gimlin film. He's kind of photographed up there in the corner. Bigfoot sort of stalking through the Bluff Creek area of California back in '67. This is actually one of the casts that was found that day. Patterson and Gimlin themselves were the ones who poured several casts in Patty's wake that day, arguably some of the most famous Bigfoot evidence of all time, right there. One of my personal favorite stories, or one of my personal favorite casts, is probably this one right here, the Grace Harbor cast, found by a police officer up in Elma, Washington. He was responding to a disturbance of sorts, and he was the one who found the track line. He was the one who cast it. He staked his reputation on it by writing it in his police report. Today, this cast is famous not just because of that iconic shape, but because it was a lawman that found it. So a lot more credibility, perhaps, than some of the other people who found some of these foot casts over time. This was found here. This is not a Bigfoot footprint here. This is a Bigfoot handprint. Found by a guy named Tom Shea right here inside the Bluegrass Triangle. Really not that far from where we're standing. Found about 5-6 years ago by Tom. And if you ask the fellows on Finding Bigfoot, the Animal Planet television show, Cliff, Bobo, they make a lot of the rounds at conferences and festivals across the country. They often will Cliff in particular will often tell you that Tom's handprint here, what they call the Goliath handprint, and many of Tom's other finds, some of the footprints he's found here in Kentucky, are some of the best Bigfoot evidence, certainly since maybe the 1980s, if not since the 1960s, if not ever. And it was found right here within the Bluegrass Triangle. So, for those keeping score at home, not only do we have some of the greatest Bigfoot evidence ever discovered right here within the Bluegrass Triangle, we also have famous UFO alien abductions. We have all sorts of other cryptids, including the famous Hopkinsville Goblin UFO alien shootout. On top of that, we have all sorts of ghost stories, haunted hotspots. By golly, we have all sorts of haunted and cursed items. We even have some famous filmmakers that also hailed from this area of the country as well. And all these things are within 20, 30, 40 miles of the Nightmare Gallery, where we're at right now. That's one of the reasons that me and my wife opened the Nightmare Gallery. Those stories have always interested me, but as someone who's a fan of folklore and legend, you know, it seems to me that if we don't strive to keep these stories alive, that sooner or later they're going to fade away, or they're going to die completely. And to us, that would be a huge injustice. And so, that was why we built this place, as sort of a repository for all these unusual stories. And we've been so impressed, we've been so overwhelmed, maybe, and humbled by the amount of people coming from all over the United States, almost on a daily basis, here to the Nightmare Gallery, that we already have plans to expand. Just on the other side of the wall behind me, we recently it was our storeroom. And now we've repainted the storeroom. We've had new lights on the wall to sort of match this room. And our plan right now is by, I don't know, probably February or March of next year to nearly double the size of the gallery. That's our immediate plans. There's a whole lot more stories to tell. I'm always learning things about this area and these fields of research myself. And so it's almost my mission to keep these legends going, keep the ball rolling, and hopefully someday we might get some firm answers as to what's really going on out there in the world. So that's kind of an overview of some. By no means is it every story here at the gallery. I could wax on and on probably for hours about everything here in the gallery. I always tell people everything in the Nightmare Gallery has a story behind it. All you have to do is ask. So if you have any visitors who are interested in visiting the gallery, trust me, every single tour I give is a little different, sometimes very different, depending on what your tastes are. I could tell all sorts of stories about all sorts of folklore and stuff we have, not just in Kentucky, but all across Appalachia. So I invite anybody who's interested in the unusual, the unexplained, or the otherworldly, as well as thrills and chills from cinema, from the silver screen, to come by and say hello. And I promise you'll get a free tour out of it. And you get a chance to shop in what I call our one-of-a-kind gift shop. We do have, I think, a lot of things here for sale that really can't be purchased anywhere else in the world. Certainly not in this part of the world, I'll put it like that. As well as you can get signed copies of all my books. I've written 4 now, 2 on ghost hunting, 1 on the Bigfoot phenomenon called the Bigfooter's Atlas, which actually received an award from the International Cryptozoology Museum back in 2020. It was hailed by Lauren Coleman to be the book of the year, which is one of the most humbling, it's such a special moment to get that sort of recognition, especially from such a big name as Lauren Coleman. But also I recently finished work on a book called the UFO Chasers Atlas, sort of a sequel to the Bigfoot one that also take people, this time as the name implies, to a lot of UFO hotspots. This fall, I have a 5th book, maybe final, I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm going to I don't know if I'm going to continue or not. We'll see. When I find time. It's hard finding time. But I've got a 5th book coming out called The Mothman. It's about the Mothman. It's going to be called The Atlas of the Unexplained Mothman. As the title implies, it could very well be the first in a series of Atlas of the Unexplained installments, but I don't know. I don't want to commit myself right now. But that's coming out this fall, and I'm going to go ahead and say this. I think it's going to be the best book I've ever written. I say this because I'm very hard on myself, very hard on my writing, very hard on the map making and all my art. So I'm very proud of this. I'll just put it like that. But it should be out later on this fall. Visitors to the museum will have a chance to be the first ones to purchase it as well. But yes, that sort of completes the formal part of the tour here. So I hope you enjoyed your visit to the Nightmare Gallery.
That's great. Do you want to tell people where you're located?
Yes, the Nightmare Gallery is located right here in Somerset, Kentucky. This is South Central Kentucky in the beautiful Lake Cumberland region. If there's no other reason to come to Somerset than Lake Cumberland, which is a huge tourist attraction. There's cabins and it's a beautiful area. On top of that, we're positioned right here in this area as well. Also, huge old car shows. We have one of the largest car shows for antique and vintage cars in the country. There's plenty of reasons to come to this area. We try to market ourselves as just one more. So, South Central Kentucky, Somerset, Kentucky is the name of the town that we're in. Tours here to the gallery are free. All you have to do is go to our website, www.nightmaregallery.net, and you will find a interface where you can book a tour. We're open for tours 7 days a week. All we ask is that you book a tour beforehand. Sometimes our hours are limited, and there's some days where we're going to be out of town to different events. We do a lot of traveling, as the name implies, Paranormal Roadtrippers. But if you get on there in advance, you'll know for sure what days we're going to be open, what days that we still have tours available, and we welcome anybody with an interest in this subject to stop by and say hello.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for talking with us, and we'll put links to all of everything Road Trippers at the end of the show. All right. Thank you so much.
Right, so we just left the Nightmare Gallery in Somerset, Kentucky. And we, as everyone knows, we always try to find a locally owned restaurant to eat at and to kind of promote when we go places. We just happened to find the owner.
Hi.
She's going to tell more about her restaurant.
Hi, my name's April. I'm from Eubank Pizza in Somerset, Kentucky. We've been here since 2019. We're making Chicago-style pizzas in rural Kentucky. We have phenomenal pizza and sandwiches. Come in and check us out. We're at 4546 South Highway 27, Somerset, Kentucky. Phone number is 606-451-7661.
Perfect. And the best wings you've ever had.
Best wings on the chicken strip.
Man, it's so good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.